The heavy boots of the human soldier echoed through the wide crystal corridor. The sound bounced against walls that shimmered faintly with the glow of alien light. Each step he took felt heavier than the last, not because of the weight of his armor, but because of the silence. It was not the silence of peace, it was the silence of a palace after war. No music, no voices, no guards, only emptiness. He had been given a simple order: check the royal wing of the alien palace. Confirm if anyone of the royal line had survived the final strike. If there were survivors, protect them until further instructions. If there were none, then report back. But orders did not ease the strange feeling in his chest. He was a soldier, yes, but he was also a man walking through the ruins of lives he did not truly understand. At the end of the corridor stood a great door, carved with delicate patterns that told stories of a kingdom long before the war. Half the door was cracked, burned from explosives. He pushed it open with caution, the door groaning under his hand, and then he froze. The chamber was wide and bright, walls made of living crystal that shimmered like frozen starlight. In the very center stood a figure, small and delicate against the grand design. It was a young woman, no, not just a woman. He recognized her from the reports and the banners of war. She was the princess of this world, the last heir of the alien throne. But what struck him first was not her title. It was her state. She was nude, her slender form bathed in the glow of the crystal walls. Her skin carried a faint silver hue, smooth and strange, yet undeniably beautiful. For a long breath, time stopped. The soldier's eyes widened, not in lust, but in shock. He had expected guards, servants, survivors. He had not expected this. The princess gasped the moment she saw him. Her luminous eyes widened, glowing with both fear and shame. She turned quickly, covering her body with trembling arms, her voice breaking as she cried out in her own language. The sound was soft, melodic, but full of alarm. The soldier's instincts screamed to move, to speak, but he held still. He knew if he made a single wrong move, she would see him not as a man, but as an invader. Just another human who had stolen her home. Slowly, carefully, he lowered his weapon. The metallic clank of his rifle touching the crystal floor echoed through the chamber. She pressed her back against the wall, her body trembling, her breath sharp and fast. She looked like a cornered bird, fragile yet proud, desperate to defend herself though she had no shield, no sword, nothing to hide behind but her bare arms. The soldier swallowed hard. His chest tightened with something he had not expected to feel. This was not the face of an enemy commander. This was not the face of someone who had ordered fleets into battle. This was a young woman who had lost everything, now stripped even of dignity. With slow hands, he unclipped his armored cloak and lowered it onto the ground between them. He did not push it toward her. He only placed it there, a silent offering. His eyes turned away, refusing to stare at her exposed form. The princess blinked, confusion mixing with fear. She glanced at the cloak, then back at him. Her lips trembled as she whispered words in broken human tongue. "Why, you do this?" Her voice was soft, trembling like a candle flame in the wind. The soldier's voice was low, calm, almost gentle, "Because you are alive, and that matters." For a long moment, silence filled the chamber again. The princess looked down at the cloak, her hands clutching her arms tighter. Her body still shook, but something in her eyes shifted. The fear did not vanish, but there was a crack in the wall of her terror. A small light broke through, doubt, curiosity, and perhaps the tiniest seed of trust. And in that fragile moment, two enemies stood in the ruins of a war, staring at each other not as soldier and princess, but as two souls caught naked in the truth of survival. The heavy boots of the human soldier echoed through the wide crystal corridor. The sound bounced against walls that shimmered faintly with the glow of alien light. Each step he took felt heavier than the last, not because of the weight of his armor, but because of the silence. It was not the silence of peace, it was the silence of a palace after war. No music, no voices, no guards, only emptiness. He had been given a simple order: check the royal wing of the alien palace. Confirm if anyone of the royal line had survived the final strike. If there were survivors, protect them until further instructions. If there were none, then report back. But orders did not ease the strange feeling in his chest. He was a soldier, yes, but he was also a man walking through the ruins of lives he did not truly understand. At the end of the corridor stood a great door, carved with delicate patterns that told stories of a kingdom long before the war. Half the door was cracked, burned from explosives. He pushed it open with caution, the door groaning under his hand. And then he froze. The chamber was wide and bright, walls made of living crystal that shimmered like frozen starlight. In the very center stood a figure, small and delicate against the grand design. It was a young woman, no, not just a woman. He recognized her from the reports and the banners of war. She was the princess of this world, the last heir of the alien throne. But what struck him first was not her title. It was her state. She was nude, her slender form bathed in the glow of the crystal walls. Her skin carried a faint silver hue, smooth and strange, yet undeniably beautiful. For a long breath, time stopped. The soldier's eyes widened, not in lust, but in shock. He had expected guards, servants, survivors. He had not expected this. The princess gasped the moment she saw him. Her luminous eyes widened, glowing with both fear and shame. She turned quickly, covering her body with trembling arms, her voice breaking as she cried out in her own language. The sound was soft, melodic, but full of alarm. The soldier's instincts screamed to move, to speak, but he held still. He knew if he made a single wrong move, she would see him not as a man, but as an invader. Just another human who had stolen her home. Slowly, carefully, he lowered his weapon. The metallic clank of his rifle touching the crystal floor echoed through the chamber. She pressed her back against the wall, her body trembling, her breath sharp and fast. She looked like a cornered bird, fragile yet proud, desperate to defend herself though she had no shield, no sword, nothing to hide behind but her bare arms. The soldier swallowed hard. His chest tightened with something he had not expected to feel. This was not the face of an enemy commander. This was not the face of someone who had ordered fleets into battle. This was a young woman who had lost everything, now stripped even of dignity. With slow hands, he unclipped his armored cloak and lowered it onto the ground between them. He did not push it toward her. He only placed it there, a silent offering. His eyes turned away, refusing to stare at her exposed form. The princess blinked, confusion mixing with fear. She glanced at the cloak, then back at him. Her lips trembled as she whispered words in broken human tongue. "Why, you do this?" Her voice was soft, trembling like a candle flame in the wind. The soldier's voice was low, calm, almost gentle, "Because you are alive, and that matters." For a long moment, silence filled the chamber again. The princess looked down at the cloak, her hands clutching her arms tighter. Her body still shook, but something in her eyes shifted. The fear did not vanish, but there was a crack in the wall of her terror. A small light broke through, doubt, curiosity, and perhaps the tiniest seed of trust. And in that fragile moment, two enemies stood in the ruins of a war, staring at each other not as soldier and princess, but as two souls caught naked in the truth of survival. The princess clutched the cloak around her like a lifeline. Her body was still trembling, but her eyes, though wary, were beginning to focus. Not on fear, not on shame, but on him. The human soldier remained kneeling a few steps away, quiet, still, giving her the space she needed. His calm presence was strange and unfamiliar, yet comforting in its own way. For the first time in months, she felt the tiniest flicker of safety. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft and hesitant, trembling like fragile glass. "Why, you do not hurt me." The words were broken, halting, but there was more than fear in them. There was curiosity, confusion, even a strange, hesitant hope. The soldier's gaze lowered to meet hers, warm and steady. "Because I am not here to destroy. I am here to help," he said gently. "I cannot undo what has been done, but I can make sure you are safe now." Her eyes widened at the sincerity in his voice. She had never expected this. Humans in her memory had always been harsh, cruel, and relentless. They had burned cities, toppled her kingdom, and left her alone in the ruins. And yet this one human spoke words that were soft, almost tender. She wanted to ask why, but words stuck in her throat. Could she trust him? Could she dare to believe in kindness from someone whose kind had caused so much pain? Her hand tightened around the cloak as a tear slid down her cheek. She looked away, trying to hide the trembling in her body. You should not be here. You should leave," she whispered. The words sounded like a command, but even as she spoke them, she knew she did not truly mean it. The soldier tilted his head slightly. "I cannot leave. Not while you are here. You are alive, and that is more important than anything else." Something in her chest ached. The truth of his words cut through layers of fear and sorrow. She had expected humans to gloat over her vulnerability, to see her as weak and powerless. Yet here he was, kneeling, speaking only to P. Rotect, not to judge. It confused her, stirred something she had long buried, a feeling of connection, a glimmer of hope that perhaps not all humans were monsters. She finally allowed herself to take a step closer, though her movements were cautious. The cloak wrapped around her body like armor, shielding her from both the cold crystal floor and the rawness of her own emotions. You could leave and I would not stop you," she said softly, almost to herself. He shook his head gently. "No, I am here. I will not abandon you. I will stay." Her luminous eyes glistened with tears. She wanted to look away, to resist the warmth creeping into her heart, but she could not. Somehow, across the barriers of species, language, and war, a connection was forming. In the silence between words, a bridge began to take shape. Fragile but undeniable, the distant sounds of the city still echoed, explosions and collapsing buildings, but inside the chamber a quiet bubble had formed. Here there was no war, no enemies, only two beings, meeting in the middle of devastation, finding a human truth that transcended conflict. Survival was precious, and compassion was rare and powerful. She finally spoke again, this time more clearly. You trust me?" He shook his head slightly. "I do not know yet, but I want to, and I want you to trust me too. It is the only way forward." Her lips trembled as she considered the weight of his words. Could she trust him? Could she allow herself to hope again, even a little? She had lost everything, her family, her people, her kingdom. But perhaps she thought survival was not just about existing. Perhaps survival was about finding the courage to open one's heart again. Slowly, cautiously, she stepped closer still, letting the cloak hang loosely over her shoulders. The walls of fear and shame around her heart were not gone, but they were no longer complete. A small crack had appeared, and through that crack light began to enter, a fragile, trembling light called trust. In the silence of the ruined palace, amid the echoes of war, the human soldier and the alien princess shared their first true conversation, a conversation built not on diplomacy, not on orders, but on the simplest and strongest bond of all, recognition of each other's humanity. The distant rumble of explosions echoed through the shattered palace, a constant reminder that the war was far from over. Even though the main battle had ended, pockets of violence still burned across the city. Buildings collapsed, fire crackled, and screams were carried on the wind. The sound made the princess flinch, every tremor in the ground sending shivers through her body. Her fingers gripped the cloak tighter, as if holding on could somehow protect her from the world outside. She pressed herself against the crystal wall, back straight but body tense as though bracing for an attack that might never come. Her luminous eyes darted toward every shadow, every flicker of light, expecting danger at every turn. Each memory of the war rushed back with cruel clarity. The invasion, the explosions, the cries of her people as they were cut down one by one. Her mind played over the faces of those she had loved, faces she would never see again. Tears threatened to spill, but she swallowed them, trying to stay strong, to maintain some fragment of dignity in front of this human. The soldier remained kneeling a few steps away, silent and still, watching her without judgment. He understood the weight she carried. He had seen the aftermath of battles, the destruction humans could cause and the pain left behind. He had felt guilt for being part of the force that destroyed cities, for following orders that brought ruin. And yet here he was kneeling in the ruins of another world, offering the only thing he could: protection and understanding. The princess finally spoke, her voice small but steady. They are still out there," she whispered. "The ones who came to kill us. They will not stop. They never stop," the soldier nodded slowly. "I know. That is why you must come with me. We cannot stay here. This place is not safe." She shook her head, her long hair shimmering in the alien light. "I cannot leave. My people, my family, my throne, all gone. Everything is gone. If I leave, there is nothing left of me at all." He stood slowly, giving her space but making his presence felt. His gaze softened, voice steady. "You are more than a throne or a crown. You are alive. And that is worth more than all the symbols of power in the universe. We will survive this together." Her body shook, not from fear of him, but from the weight of his words. She wanted to believe him, to cling to the hope he offered, but the pain inside her was deep and raw. She had been betrayed, abandoned, and hunted. Trust was not something she could give easily. Yet somehow, despite everything, she felt a fragile connection forming between them, a thread of understanding, a whisper of safety in the chaos. The chamber itself seemed to tremble with the echoes of war, and she flinched again. The soldier moved closer, careful not to invade her space, and knelt beside her. "You do not have to face this alone," he said softly. "Not anymore. I will not let them hurt you again." For the first time since the war began, the princess allowed herself to breathe deeply. The terror and grief still lingered, but there was a strange, tentative comfort in knowing she was not entirely alone. She looked at him, searching for deceit, for cruelty, for any sign that he might betray her like the others had, but found none. Only steady eyes, calm and unwavering, offering something she had not expected. Hope. She closed her eyes, letting a single tear slip down her cheek, feeling the tight knot of fear and despair loosen slightly. The world outside was still dangerous, still filled with fire and death, but in that ruined chamber, a small sanctuary had been created. Between the princess and the human soldier, a silent promise hung in the air. No matter what came next, they would face it together. And in that fragile moment, the princess realized something she had not allowed herself to feel in a long time. Survival was not enough. To survive, she needed someone she could trust, someone who saw her not as a crown or a symbol, but as herself, human enough to care, strong enough to protect, compassionate enough to stay. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope. They walked carefully through the ruins of the palace, each step echoing on the shattered crystal floors. The air was thick with smoke and dust, and the faint glow of alien light flickered in the walls like dying stars. The princess held the cloak tightly around her, as if it were the only shield against the weight of the world. Her bare feet left small, trembling impressions on the cold floor, each step reminding her of all that had been lost. In the main hall, among debris and the remnants of golden statues, she saw it, a piece of her past lying in ruins. The royal crest, once proud and radiant, now shattered into fragments on the ground. She dropped to her knees, her hands shaking as she picked up the broken pieces. Her eyes filled with tears, reflecting the dim light like shattered gems. "My people, gone," she whispered, her voice trembling. "All of them, gone." The soldier stood silently a few feet away, watching her without interruption. He knew there was nothing he could say to bring back what was lost. Words were empty against the weight of grief, against the emptiness of a kingdom that had been burned and torn apart. And yet he stepped closer, offering the only comfort he could. "You are still alive," he said softly. "That matters more than all the crowns and thrones in the world. Survival is the beginning. Everything else can come later." She looked up at him, her eyes raw and glowing with pain. She wanted to hate him, to reject his words. He was human, a soldier, one of the species that had led to her people's destruction. And yet in his gaze she saw something unexpected: honesty, kindness, and something like regret. For a brief moment she allowed herself to hope, though it felt dangerous, almost foolish. She pressed the shattered crest to her chest, trembling. "But my throne, my crown, my name, it means nothing now. Without them I am nothing." The soldier knelt beside her, careful to respect her space. He spoke with quiet certainty. "No, your name is not nothing. Your life is not nothing. You are more than symbols, more than power. You are the last hope of your people, and you are alive. That is everything that matters now." Tears streamed down her face as she tried to reconcile the truth of his words with the devastation around her. She had believed that without her crown and her family she was meaningless, an echo of a kingdom that no longer existed. But here he was, telling her that her worth was not tied to symbols or wealth or titles. Her worth was in her life, in her courage to survive, and in her capacity to hope again. For the first time, she allowed herself to let go of some of the unbearable weight she had carried. The cloak, the soldier's presence, the quiet insistence that she was not alone, they were fragile threads of light in a world that had seemed only dark. She clutched the crest close, feeling the jagged edges dig into her palms, a painful reminder of all that was lost, but also a reminder that she had survived it. The soldier's gaze softened as he looked at her. "You may have lost your crown, but you have not lost yourself, and you have not lost the chance to rebuild piece by piece, one step at a time." She nodded slowly, a shiver running through her body. Not from fear this time, but from the first real stirrings of resolve. Perhaps she could rebuild, perhaps she could survive, and perhaps even find strength in unexpected places. The crown was broken, but she was still alive, and in that survival was a power greater than any throne. For the first time, the princess looked at him with something like gratitude, something that went beyond words. He had seen her not as a symbol, not as a prize or a threat, but as a person. And that recognition, small and fragile though it was, ignited a spark of hope inside her that she thought had died forever. In the ruins of her kingdom, amid the broken fragments of a life she thought she had lost, the princess realized something. Even in despair, life and courage could endure. And from that endurance, the first seeds of a new future could grow. The princess and the soldier moved slowly through the half-ruined corridors of the palace. Dust hung in the air like a gray fog, and small fires flickered in the distance, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Despite the devastation, there was something comforting in the quiet rhythm of their footsteps. Neither spoke much, yet the silence between them was not empty. It was a fragile bridge, a tentative understanding growing stronger with every shared glance and careful movement. The princess wrapped the cloak tightly around her shoulders, trying to hold herself together. Her luminous eyes scanned every shadow, wary of any sudden movement, yet the human remained calm and steady, always near enough to offer protection without ever crowding her. There was a strange comfort in his presence, something that warmed the icy fear she had carried since the first night of the invasion. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft and hesitant, barely louder than a whisper. "Why, you stay with me?" "You do not have to." He stopped and looked at her, eyes gentle but firm. "I do not leave people behind," he said simply. "I could have walked away. I could have followed orders and left you, but I chose not to. You are alive. That is enough reason for me." Her hands shook as she adjusted the cloak. She wanted to believe him, but trust was fragile, like a delicate crystal about to shatter. You should hate me," she murmured. "Your kind. They destroyed everything I loved. Why would you care for me?" He knelt beside her, careful not to invade her space, and looked her in the eyes. "I do not hate you. I hate what was done, what happened, the war that took your people. But I do not hate you. You are not responsible for the crimes of others. You are not their war. You are yourself, and that matters." The princess swallowed hard, tears forming at the edges of her eyes. She wanted to turn away, to retreat into the safety of solitude, but she could not. His words, so simple yet so profound, touched something deep inside her. She had been alone for so long, thinking no one could understand her pain, that no one could see her as more than a princess, a symbol, a target. And yet here he was, seeing her as a person, not a crown, not a prize, not a relic of a lost kingdom. For the first time in what felt like years, she allowed herself to relax just a little. Her shoulders eased, her trembling slowed, and the weight on her chest lifted slightly. The bridge between them, still fragile and tentative, had begun to hold. She dared to take a small step closer to him, letting the cloak slip slightly from her shoulders. You do not fear me?" she asked, her voice soft. He shook his head, a faint, reassuring smile crossing his face. "No, I see you. That is enough. Fear has no place here, only understanding." A small, almost imperceptible smile formed on her lips, the first since the night the war had begun. She could not speak the words yet, but her heart felt lighter. In the midst of ruin, in a palace that had seen death and fire, she had found something unexpected: safety, compassion, and perhaps a beginning of hope. They continued through the corridors side by side, silent yet connected. Outside, the sounds of destruction continued, a harsh reminder that the world had not yet healed. Inside, however, a quiet warmth lingered, fragile but real. Each step they took together reinforced the bridge between them, a bridge built on trust, understanding, and the shared will to survive. The princess glanced at him, eyes glimmering with a mixture of fear, gratitude, and something she could not yet name. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He nodded, eyes meeting hers with steady reassurance. "You do not have to thank me. Just survive. That is enough." For the first time, she believed it might be possible, not just to survive, but to live, even in the shadow of everything she had lost. And in that belief, the smallest spark of hope began to burn. In the ruins of a fallen kingdom amid the echoes of war, a fragile bridge had formed between two beings from different worlds. One was a soldier who had seen too much destruction, the other a princess who had lost everything. Yet together, they had found something neither had expected: connection, understanding, and the first thread of trust in a shattered universe. The first light of dawn crept through the shattered walls of the palace, bathing the ruins in pale gold. Dust and smoke hung in the air, but in the quiet morning the world seemed to pause for just a moment. The princess stood at the center of the main hall, the cloak wrapped tightly around her, her luminous eyes reflecting the soft light. Beside her, the human soldier knelt, scanning the ruins for any signs of danger. The city outside still smoldered, but in this chamber a fragile sense of peace had begun to form. She looked down at her hands, the same hands that had held broken crowns and lifeless debris. "Everything is gone," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "My people, my throne, my home, all gone." The soldier placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, not to touch her in a way that would intrude, but to remind her that she was not alone. "Yes," he said softly, "but you are still here. That matters more than anything else. All the rest, we can face together." For the first time, the princess felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in a long time: hope. It was small, fragile, almost painful in its weakness, but it existed. She realized that survival alone was not enough. To truly live, she needed connection, trust, and courage. And in this human, she had found all three. Her gaze met his, searching, questioning, uncertain. Why did you help me? Why did you stay?" He stood slowly, his armor heavy, but his movements calm. "Because humanity is not only about destruction," he said, his voice steady. "We destroy, yes, and we fight. But we also care. We can be cruel, and yet we can also protect. I chose to protect you because you are alive. That is worth more than anything else." Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not shy away. For the first time, she allowed herself to fully acknowledge her vulnerability, and yet she did not feel shame. His words, his calm presence, his refusal to judge her for her past or her weakness, it all spoke of something she had long forgotten: humanity's power to give, not just take. The ruined palace felt less like a tomb now and more like the start of something new. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of grief loosen slightly. Her past was gone, yes, but her life remained, and she would not squander it. She had survived when all else had fallen, and that survival was a gift she would honor. The soldier extended his hand, simple and unassuming. "Come," he said. "We leave this place. There is a world beyond these ruins, and we can face it together." She hesitated, then slowly placed her hand in his. The touch was gentle but steady, a silent promise that they would move forward side by side. The ruins behind them were heavy with sorrow, but each step toward the outside world felt lighter. With every movement, she felt the strength returning to her. Not the strength of a crown or a throne, but the strength of life, courage, and trust. As they emerged into the pale morning light, the city burned behind them, yet they did not look back. She did not mourn the loss of what could not be changed. Instead, she looked ahead, toward the unknown, toward survival, and toward hope. The soldier walked beside her, a quiet companion in a world still fractured by war, yet capable of great kindness. She realized something profound in that moment. Humanity's greatest gift was not fire, not weapons, not power. It was compassion. It was the courage to protect when no one else could. It was the choice to care, even in a universe that often seemed cruel and indifferent. For the first time since the war began, she smiled. Small, tentative, but real. She had expected only death, only loss. Instead, she had found something far more valuable: trust, connection, and the simple truth that life itself was worth fighting for. And in that truth, she understood that her story was not over. It was only just beginning. With the soldier by her side, she stepped forward into the unknown, carrying nothing but her own courage, her fragile hope, and the gift of humanity that had saved her.